The rain came down in quiet sheets that Tuesday afternoon, blurring the city outside the floor-to-ceiling windows of Brennan Media Group's 14th floor cafeteria. Sloane Mercer sat alone at a corner table, her lunch untouched, her eyes fixed on the condensation sliding down her water glass. 3 weeks into her new job, 3 weeks of polite smiles that didn't reach anyone's eyes. 3 weeks of eating alone while the rest of the creative department clustered in groups she hadn't been invited to join. She was beginning to wonder if she had made a terrible mistake. Portland felt like another lifetime now, though she'd only left 6 weeks ago. The apartment she'd shared with her college roommate, the small design firm, where she'd spent 4 years creating logos for dental offices and local restaurants, the version of herself who had been content with comfortable and unremarkable, all of it behind her now. She had driven 14 hours to get here, stopped twice, slept in a motel outside Columbus that smelled faintly of pine cleaner and old carpet. The drive itself had felt like one continuous act of leaving. Brennan Media Group was a brand development company with offices in 7 cities. Their in-house creative department had a reputation for ambitious, exacting work. Their campaigns were the kind that ended up being discussed in industry circles, dissected in design school classrooms, held up as examples of what was possible when a team was given both resources and nerve. When Sloane had first come across their work 3 years earlier, she had saved the entire archive to a folder on her laptop and visited it periodically the way other people visited art museums to remind herself that this level of care was achievable even if she wasn't achieving it yet. When the offer came, she had sat very still in her kitchen for a long time, reading the email 3 times before she typed her acceptance. Now she was here in a city she barely knew. In an apartment still full of boxes, she hadn't found the energy to unpack working a job that had turned out to be considerably more complicated than the job description suggested. Not in scope, but in the human architecture of it. The politics, the unspoken rules about who spoke in which meetings and who deferred to whom, and which client accounts carried prestige and which were considered punishments. The creative department at Brennan Media Group was a well-oiled machine that had been running long before Sloane arrived and had no obvious interest in adjusting its gears to accommodate her. Her direct manager, a precise woman named Claire Whitfield, had shown Sloane to her desk on the first morning, handed her a stack of brand guidelines and internal documentation, and said, "Read these, ask me questions if you need to, but try not to need to." Then she had disappeared into a glass-walled conference room, and Sloane had not spoken to her again for 2 days. Her colleagues were not unfriendly exactly. They were simply occupied. They had existing rhythms, existing jokes, existing shorthand. There was a woman named Autumn Reeves who kept a candy bowl on her desk and was clearly the social center of the department. People stopped by her desk the way people in old movies stopped by the corner diner. And Autumn always had something to say that made them leave looking lighter. There was a senior designer named Brett who was obviously brilliant and obviously knew it, and who reviewed Sloane's first submitted deck with the particular care of someone who enjoys finding errors. There was a quiet man called Owen who worked at the far end of the room and ate lunch at his desk every single day, and who Sloane had decided privately was probably the most interesting person in the building and simply didn't feel the need to demonstrate it. When Sloane sat in on her first team meeting, the conversation moved so quickly, references she didn't recognize, client names she hadn't learned yet, in an ongoing dispute about some color palette that apparently carried emotional weight. She couldn't fathom that she had filled an entire page of her notebook with questions she was afraid to ask. The cafeteria on the 14th floor was the one place she felt genuinely invisible, rather than merely overlooked, which she was beginning to prefer. She could sit at her corner table with her salad and her phone and not have to perform the effort of belonging. She could simply be a woman eating lunch, which required nothing of her. It was a large cafeteria for a corporate space. Brennan occupied the top 8 floors of a building that also housed 2 other companies, and the cafeteria served all 3. There were good windows, a real espresso machine, a section of plants that someone clearly cared for. It should have felt welcoming. On most days, for most people, it probably did. For Sloane, in the 3rd week of her new life, it was simply the place she ate alone and tried not to make eye contact with anyone who might feel obligated to come over. Except that on her 3rd Tuesday, she forgot her phone at her desk. And without the prop of it, the solitude felt less like privacy and more like what it actually was, a woman in a corner, waiting for the world to make room for her. Not entirely sure it would. She was watching the rain slide down the glass when she heard the small sound, the scrape of a chair, and looked up. The little girl was already there. The backpack was the first thing Sloane really saw. It was shaped like a white rabbit, a proper stuffed animal shape, not just a print. Long, floppy ears and a small, embroidered pink nose. It was the kind of thing a child picked out herself with absolute conviction in the middle of a store while a parent waited. Sloane knew this because she had once been that child with a backpack shaped like a ladybug that she had refused to replace until the zipper broke. The girl was small for what Sloane guessed was her age, 6 or 7, with light brown hair pulled into 2 uneven pigtails that suggested they had been done by someone trying their best, but not entirely sure what they were doing. Her dress was yellow with small white dots. She had a small scratch on her left knee that was in the late stages of healing. She looked at Sloane with direct, assessing eyes. "Can I sit with you?" The question was asked in a quiet voice, careful as if she already understood that asking for things had sometimes meant being told no. Sloane smiled before she even had time to think about it. "Of course you can." The little girl set her backpack carefully on the table and climbed into the chair with the focused efficiency of someone who had climbed many chairs. She unzipped her rabbit backpack and produced a small container of crackers with geometric precision. "I have to wait here because my mom is working late," she said by way of explanation. "Sometimes I wait in her office, but it's boring in there. The chairs are too big." "That's fair," Sloane said. "The chairs in the big offices are designed for looking impressive, not for actually sitting in." The girl looked at her with sudden pleased surprise, the expression of a child who has said something and been taken seriously. "That's exactly what they are," she said firmly. "Impressive chairs." They ate in companionable quiet for a moment. Sloane found herself eating her actual lunch, which she hadn't really been doing before the girl sat down. There was something about the matter-of-fact presence of the child, the way she ate her crackers, methodically examining each one before she bit it, that made the table feel inhabited rather than empty. "What's your name?" Sloane asked. "Ivy." "I'm Sloane." Ivy nodded, apparently satisfied with this exchange. "What do you like?" Sloane asked. It was the question she always asked children because it was the right question. Not "what grade are you in?" Not "what do you want to be when you grow up?" But "what do you like right now?" Today, Ivy didn't hesitate. "Drawing, strawberry cake, books about animals." She paused. "Not broccoli." Sloane laughed. A real laugh surprised out of her. "What did broccoli ever do to you?" "It tastes like the outside," Ivy said with great seriousness. "The outside, like grass, like fresh air." Ivy pointed at her. "Exactly like that. I don't want to eat the outside." Sloane was still smiling when she became aware at the far edge of her vision of someone standing near the cafeteria entrance. She didn't look directly at him, but she felt in the particular way that you sometimes feel observe the weight of someone's attention. When she finally glanced over, the doorway was empty. She turned back to Ivy. The girl had produced a small notebook from her backpack and was showing Sloane a drawing, a house with enormous windows and a garden full of animals she had drawn with careful attention to each species. "The giraffe lives next door," Ivy explained, pointing. "Of course he does," Sloane agreed. "His name was Thaddeus Brennan, though most people called him Thad, and he was by most measurable metrics not a man who stood in doorways watching things. He made decisions. He held meetings that ran exactly as long as they needed to, and not a minute longer. He had restructured the company's entire brand licensing division in 18 months and been written about in 2 industry publications for doing so. His assistant, Marcus, kept a calendar so precisely managed that it included travel time between floors and accounted for the particular efficiency of using the service elevator versus the main bank when crossing the building. He did not stand in doorways. He did not watch. He was in the culture of the company he ran, understood to be demanding and fair in equal measure, a combination that most people found more sustainable than the alternatives. He remembered the names of people who had been with the company for years. He attended the funerals of employees' parents when he could. He sent handwritten notes not because it was a strategy, but because his own mother had always done it, and he had absorbed the belief that a handwritten sentence conveyed something a typed one couldn't. He was also, when a project was failing, capable of a directness so clean and unapologetic that it had made grown men go pale. He had been described by a journalist who had interviewed him for a profile he'd agreed to reluctantly as a man who has decided exactly who he is and is therefore very difficult to manage. The journalist had meant it as a mild criticism. Thad had kept the quote in a drawer. He was 38 years old. He had been running Brennan Media Group for 6 years since his mentor and the company's founder, Gerald Park, had retired and handed him the reins with the words, "Don't make it into something it isn't. It's already good. Just make it better." He had, to the best of his ability, tried to honor that. He was in the parts of his life visible to the professional world, a competent and self-possessed man. In the parts of his life that were not visible, he was a father doing his best, which was the most uncertain thing he had ever been. Except that he had seen Ivy walk toward the corner table. He'd been following her at a distance because 6-year-olds in office buildings required monitoring regardless of how independent they believed themselves to be. And then he had stopped because Ivy had asked to sit down. This was not on its face a remarkable thing. Children asked to sit down, but Ivy had not asked to sit anywhere near a stranger in almost 2 years. Since her mother died, the instinct had simply gone out of her, the ease of approach, the willingness to enter someone else's space without knowing what she'd find there. At school, her teacher had mentioned it in careful language at the parent-teacher conference, using phrases like "tends towards solitary play" and "may benefit from structured social activities," which were the professional vocabulary for something Thad understood more plainly. His daughter was protecting herself against further losses by simply not attaching to new things. He didn't push. He had learned in the difficult first year of grief that pushing produced nothing good. He simply tried to make sure she was warm and fed, and that someone read to her at night, and that she knew she was loved, which he told her directly and without embarrassment every single day, because his own father had never said it, and he had decided early on that this would not be his inheritance to pass on. He had watched Ivy move through the world these last 2 years with a kind of aching respect. She was braver than she knew. She got up every morning and put on her shoes and went to school and did her work and drew her pictures and ate her dinner and asked for one more story at bedtime. And all of it was a form of courage she hadn't asked to need. He told her she was brave when she needed to hear it. He made sure she saw that he cried sometimes too, because a grief counselor had told him early on that hiding it would teach her to hide it. And he refused that lesson. But here was Ivy sitting across from a young woman he didn't recognize, new to the department, judging by the ID badge, and she was talking. Not performing, not enduring, talking. Her hands moved when she spoke, which they only did when she was genuinely engaged. She was showing the woman her notebook. The woman was leaning in to look. Thad stayed in the doorway for longer than he intended, long enough to see the woman laugh at something Ivy said, long enough to see Ivy point at something in the drawing with the authority of an artist explaining her work. Long enough to see the particular quality of the woman's attention, not performed, not the bright, professional enthusiasm of someone aware they were being watched, but actual present listening. He left before either of them noticed him. He spent the rest of the afternoon in a board meeting, but he found himself more than once thinking about the corner table, about the way Ivy's hands had moved about the laugh. When he picked her up from the cafeteria 2 hours later, she talked about Sloane for the entire car ride home. She talked about her while they made dinner. She talked about the drawing lesson and the broccoli conversation, and a theory Sloane had offered about why juice tastes better in a box than in a glass, which Ivy had accepted as scientific fact. She fell asleep mid-sentence telling him about a giraffe that lived next door to a house with big windows. He lay awake that night thinking about what it meant, a child who had retreated from the world suddenly walking toward it again. What had made the difference? What the woman at the corner table had done or said, or simply been? By morning he had made a decision. He would find out. The call came through at 10:15 the following morning. Sloane was in the middle of reformatting a brand deck, a task that required the kind of focused tedium she had gotten good at sustaining through headphones and coffee. When her desk phone rang the internal line, which she had used approximately twice, she answered it with her pen still in her hand. "This is Sloane Mercer." The voice was measured professionally neutral. "Miss Mercer, this is Marcus Reed, Executive Assistant to Thaddeus Brennan. Mr. Brennan would like to speak with you at 11 o'clock if your schedule allows." Sloane's pen went still. "I'm sorry, Thaddeus Brennan." "Yes, ma'am." "The CEO." "Yes," she said, "of course." Obviously, you did not say no to the CEO's calendar. But she spent the next 45 minutes in a quiet, controlled state of dread, cycling through everything she might have done wrong in 3 weeks. The revised Kellerman deck she'd submitted last Friday had something been off. Had she copied the wrong person on an email? Had she somehow, in some way she couldn't identify, made an error visible enough to reach the executive floor? She straightened her jacket in the elevator mirror. She told herself she looked professional. She was not entirely convinced. Marcus met her at the elevator and walked her to the office with a small, reassuring nod that she clung to like driftwood. The office itself was large but not ostentatious. Clean lines, good light, a desk that was genuinely tidy rather than staged for appearances. Bookshelves with actual books on them. One framed drawing on the wall near the window, a crayon house with enormous windows and a giraffe standing beside it. Sloane recognized it immediately, and her anxiety shifted into something else, something softer and more confused. Thaddeus Brennan was standing at the window when she entered. He turned and she recognized him at once, the man in the cafeteria doorway. He was taller than he'd seemed at a distance. The stillness she'd noticed from across the room was not coldness, she realized now. It was the particular quality of someone who paid close attention. He gestured to the chair across from his desk. "Please sit down, Miss Mercer. Thank you for coming." His voice was not what she'd expected from the stories she'd heard about him, clipped boardroom authority, the voice of a man who ended meetings by standing up. It was quieter than that, more careful. "Of course," she said. She sat. She folded her hands in her lap and waited. He looked at her for a moment, not appraisingly, not in the way that made her feel assessed, but in the way of someone choosing words. "I want to ask you something that may seem unusual," he said. "I'll explain the context so it doesn't catch you off guard." He paused. "What did you talk about with my daughter yesterday afternoon?" The dread evaporated. In its place came a rush of understanding that rearranged the entire morning. The rabbit backpack, the giraffe. "Your daughter," she said. "Yes, Ivy." Sloane thought about it honestly. "Broccoli," she said. "Mostly broccoli at first. And a drawing she showed me of a house with a lot of animals living nearby." She hesitated. "She's very serious about her art. She explained the whole neighborhood to me." Something moved across Thaddeus Brennan's face. Not quite a smile, but the vicinity of one. "Yes," he said quietly. "She is." He did not tell her everything at once. He was not, she would come to understand later, a man who disclosed things quickly. But he told her enough. He told her that Ivy's mother, her name had been Margot, had died 26 months ago from stage 4 breast cancer. She had been diagnosed when Ivy was 3. She had lived 18 months past the initial prognosis, which the doctors had attributed to sheer stubbornness and an unusual tolerance for experimental treatments. Ivy had been 4 years old when her mother died, old enough to understand the permanent shape of the word, gone young enough that the edges of the memory would eventually blur in ways that were both merciful and terrible. In the months after Ivy had become very quiet, not sad in the dramatic, visible way, she didn't cry, often didn't throw tantrums, didn't act out in the ways the grief counselor had gently suggested were possible. She simply became careful, considered. She watched things rather than participating in them. She was kind, and she was loved, and she had her drawings and her books. And Thad had done everything he knew how to do, and some things he hadn't known how to do until he had to. But she didn't walk toward people anymore. Until yesterday. "She talked about you all evening," Thad said. He was looking at his hands, which were resting flat on the desk. "She talked about you until she fell asleep." He looked up. His eyes were direct and clear and carried something in them that Sloane recognized, not because she'd experienced exactly what he had, but because she had once sat with her own father through a long illness and understood the particular exhaustion of loving someone you couldn't entirely protect. Her father had died of a heart attack when she was 19. Sudden, no warning. She had been home from college for Thanksgiving break. He had been standing at the stove making eggs when his knees buckled, and he went down. She had held his hand in the ambulance and felt the exact moment the pressure went slack. She didn't talk about it often, but she understood the shape of it, the absence that carved itself into every room. "I'm not sure I did anything remarkable," Sloane said. "Honestly, I asked her what she liked. I took her drawing seriously." "I know," he said. "That's what she told me." He was quiet for a moment. "That's the whole of it, I think. She told me that you listened like she was interesting." Sloane didn't know what to say to that. She felt the particular discomfort of receiving credit for something she hadn't intended as generosity. She had simply been a person at a table who found a child interesting because the child was interesting. She hadn't done anything strategic. She had just been present. She is interesting, Sloane said finally. The giraffe next door is a compelling narrative choice. This time the smile came through fully. It changed his face in a way she hadn't anticipated, softened it, made it younger. He looked for a moment like a man who had recently remembered that smiling was available to him. I wanted to thank you, he said, and to make sure you understood that whatever you're doing, you don't need to stop. It was not a planned arrangement. Ivy simply appeared. On the following Thursday, she was in the cafeteria when Sloane arrived for lunch. She had saved Sloane's corner table with her rabbit backpack placed on the chair, like a small, authoritative placeholder. She had also brought 2 juice boxes, one of which she pushed across the table towards Sloane, with the certainty of someone who has decided something. Apple or grape? Sloane asked, examining them. Both are apple, Ivy said. I don't like grape. Then why offer me a choice? Ivy looked at her. You could pretend one was grape if you wanted. Sloane accepted the juice box. Apple is better anyway. They ate together with the comfort of people who had already established the rules of their shared space. Ivy brought her notebook and worked on a new drawing. She was currently focused on a detailed map of an imaginary city, while Sloane ate and occasionally offered geographic input when asked. Should the library be near the park? Yes, obviously. What about the bakery? Close to the school so children could smell it during lessons and feel that the world was full of good things. It happened again the following week and the week after that. Some weeks Ivy wasn't there. Thad traveled occasionally, and on those trips, Ivy stayed with her grandmother in Vermont. But when she was in the building, she found Sloane. She began bringing her drawings to show her. A horse in a field, the imaginary city with more detail, new buildings added, a portrait of Thad that captured with remarkable accuracy the particular expression he made when he was thinking hard about something. Does he know you draw him? Sloane asked. He hangs them up, Ivy said simply. He hangs up everything I make him. Sloane thought about the framed crayon drawing in the CEO's office, the house with the enormous windows and the giraffe. That's the right thing to do, she said. She helped Ivy with homework twice when Ivy had brought it with her and gotten stuck. Long addition both times the particular challenge of carrying numbers which Ivy found philosophically suspect. Why do the numbers have to go somewhere else? She demanded. Why can't they just stay where they are? That's actually a profound question, Sloane told her. You're asking about the nature of place value. I'm asking why math is difficult. Also valid. They worked through it together with colored pencils and a system Sloane improvised involving small drawings of people carrying boxes which Ivy approved of and which crucially actually worked. By the end, Ivy could carry numbers with the confident authority of someone who has understood, rather than merely memorized, which was the only kind of understanding that stuck. Thad, arriving to collect her that afternoon, found his daughter explaining long addition to an empty chair with a colored pencil and a notebook. He stood in the doorway again, and watched. And Sloane, gathering her things at the table nearby, looked up and found him watching. And for a moment, neither of them said anything. She's going to be a very good teacher someday, Sloane said finally. Or a mathematician, he said. Both, I think. He picked up Ivy's notebook and looked at the drawings of people carrying boxes. Something in his expression was very careful and very full. Thank you, he said. Not for the first time, but this time it meant something different. Wider, deeper, harder to contain in 2 words. She was aware in that moment of something shifting in the space between them. It wasn't dramatic. There were no declarations, no abrupt recognitions, nothing that would have made a person watching from outside understand what was changing. It was simply a man who had been holding himself at a certain careful distance from the world, looking at her across a cafeteria table for one unguarded moment, and the distance being just slightly less. She thought about it on the train home. She thought about the way he had said thank you and meant something it would have taken several more words to say accuracies. She thought about the way he had held Ivy's notebook, not casually, not the way you hold a child's artwork because you are supposed to, but the way you hold something that matters to you. She thought about it and then put it away and didn't think about it again, or tried not to. Because some things were better approached obliquely from the side, the way you look at something bright that you can't look at directly yet. She had not come to this city for this. She had come here for the work, for the chance to become better at something she cared about, for the version of herself that she had been trying to grow toward. Whatever this was, this man, this child, this corner table that had somehow become the most important 10 square feet of her week, it had not been in the plan. But then the best things usually weren't. The eighth week arrived with October settling into the rhythm of shorter days and earlier darkness. Sloane had begun to feel less like a stranger in the building. Not quite welcomed, but no longer invisible. Autumn Reeves had started stopping by her desk occasionally with questions about color theory that Sloane suspected were less about needing answers and more about offering entry points into conversation. She appreciated it. Brett still reviewed her work with laser focus, but he had started CCing her on project emails without being asked which she understood was his version of acceptance. The corner table had become a fixed point in her week, Tuesdays and Thursdays unless Ivy was away. They had developed small rituals. Ivy always arrived first and saved the table. Sloane always brought an extra napkin because Ivy inevitably spilled something. They took turns choosing what to talk about. Ivy's turn meant dinosaurs, or the imaginary city Sloane's turn meant questions about what Ivy was reading or thinking about. On the second Thursday of October, Ivy arrived with a different energy. Not upset exactly, but carrying something. "My teacher says I need to write about my family for homework," she said without preamble. "But I don't know what to say about my mom because I don't remember a lot of things and it makes me feel bad." Sloane set down her fork. This was not a math problem. This was not something she could solve with colored pencils and drawings of people carrying boxes. "What do you remember?" she asked carefully. Ivy thought about it. "She smelled like lemons. She used to sing a song about a mockingbird when I couldn't sleep. She had really long hair and she let me braid it even though I wasn't good at it yet. Those are good things to remember. But I don't remember her face very much anymore unless I look at pictures. Is that bad?" Sloane felt something tighten in her chest. She thought about her own father, the way his voice had started to fade from her memory until she'd found an old voicemail and played it on repeat for a week. "It's not bad," she said. "It's just what happens. Our brains hold on to feelings more than details. So you might not remember exactly what her face looked like, but you remember how it felt when she was there. The safe feeling, the loved feeling." Ivy nodded slowly. "I remember the loved feeling." "Then that's what you write about. You don't have to remember everything perfectly to know that she loved you." Ivy picked up her crayon and started drawing in the margin of her homework sheet. A woman with long hair, a small girl next to her. Sloane, "Yeah. Do you think people who die know when we think about them?" The question landed in the space between them with surprising weight. Sloane thought about her father, about the conversations she still had with him sometimes in her head when she needed advice. "I think they do," she said. "I think love doesn't stop just because someone isn't here anymore. It just changes shape." Ivy looked up at her with those serious, assessing eyes. "I think that too." When Thad came to collect Ivy that evening, Sloane walked with them to the elevator. She didn't usually do this, but something about the conversation had made her want to make sure Ivy was all right. At the elevator, Ivy hugged Sloane quickly, a small, fierce thing, and then disappeared inside when the doors opened. Thad stayed behind for a moment. "She told me about the homework," he said quietly. "About what you said." Sloane wasn't sure what to say to that. "Thank you," he continued, "for not making it easier than it is, for telling her the truth." The elevator doors closed. They were alone in the hallway. "I know what it's like," Sloane found herself saying, "to lose someone and feel like you're supposed to remember everything perfectly and then feel guilty when you can't." He looked at her with sudden attention. "Your father," he said. It wasn't a question. She must have mentioned it at some point, though she didn't remember doing so. "Heart attack when I was 19. I was home from college. She stopped. She didn't usually talk about this. I was there when it happened." The next elevator arrived. The doors opened. Neither of them moved. "I'm sorry," he said. "It was a long time ago." "That doesn't make it stop mattering." The doors closed again. The hallway was very quiet. "No," Sloane said. "It doesn't." He was looking at her the way he had looked at her in his office that first day, direct, careful, paying attention. But there was something else in it now, something that acknowledged they were not just the CEO and the junior creative director. They were two people who understood what it meant to carry absence. Would you, He stopped, started again. Ivy has been asking if you would come to dinner at our house this Friday if you're free. It was not what she'd expected him to say. I don't want to impose. You wouldn't be. She's been planning the menu for 3 days. Apparently there will be pasta and something she's calling Sloane's favorite dessert, though I'm not sure how she determined what that is. Sloane found herself smiling. Strawberry cake. She told you that was her favorite. She did, but I told her it was mine too. Then I think we're having strawberry cake. The elevator arrived again. This time he stepped inside. He held the door with his hand. Friday, he said, 6 o'clock. I'll have Marcus send you the address. The doors closed before she could answer. She stood in the empty hallway and felt the careful distance she'd been maintaining crack just slightly. Not collapse, just crack. Enough to let something through. The house was not what Sloane expected. She had imagined something corporate, something that matched the clean lines of Thad's office, all glass and steel and carefully curated minimalism. Instead, the address Marcus sent her led to a 3-story brownstone in the south end with window boxes that still held the last of the summer flowers and a front door painted deep blue. Ivy opened it before Sloane could knock. You came? Her face was bright with something that looked like relief, as if she'd been worried Sloane might not show. Of course I came. I heard there's strawberry cake. Ivy grabbed her hand and pulled her inside. The house smelled like garlic and tomatoes and something warm baking. The interior was lived in, rather than designed bookshelves crammed with novels and art books, Ivy's drawings taped to the walls in careful rows, a collection of framed photographs on the mantel that Sloane tried not to look at too directly. That emerged from what she assumed was the kitchen, wearing jeans and a button-down, with the sleeves rolled to his elbows. It was the most casual she'd ever seen him. It changed him again, made him look less like the CEO who commanded boardrooms and more like a man who cooked dinner for his daughter on Friday nights. You found it. Your directions were very thorough. Marcus wrote them. I would have just said the blue door on Appleton. Ivy was already dragging Sloane toward the kitchen. I helped make the sauce. Dad let me stir, and I only spilled a little bit. The dinner was easy in a way Sloane hadn't expected. Ivy narrated the pasta-making process with the authority of a sous chef, pointing out which herbs she'd added and why. Thad asked Sloane about Portland, about what had brought her to Boston, and listened to her answers with the same focused attention he'd given her in his office. She found herself telling him about the design firm where she'd worked, about the comfortable mediocrity of it, about the moment she'd realized she could either stay safe or try to become the kind of designer she actually wanted to be. That's a hard choice to make, he said. It didn't feel like a choice. It felt like if I didn't leave, I'd spend the rest of my life wondering what would have happened if I had. Ivy, who had been drawing on a placemat, looked up. That's brave. Sloane met her eyes. So is asking a stranger if you can sit at their table. Something passed between them, an acknowledgement of the small courages that had led them here. After dinner, Ivy insisted on showing Sloane her room. It was exactly what a 6-year-old's room should be. Stuffed animals arranged with clear hierarchy, a bookshelf organized by color drawings tacked to every available surface. On the nightstand was a photograph of a woman with long dark hair and a smile that reached her eyes. She was holding a much younger Ivy, both of them laughing at something outside the frame. Sloane understood, without asking, that this was Margot. That's my mom, Ivy said, following her gaze. No sadness in her voice, just statement of fact. She's beautiful. Dad says I have her smile. I can't really tell because I can't see my own face when I smile. You do. You have her smile. Ivy picked up the photograph and looked at it for a moment. Sometimes I talk to her before I go to sleep. I tell her about my day. Do you think that's weird? Sloane's throat tightened. I think that's perfect. When they came back downstairs, Thad had cleared the table and was cutting the strawberry cake Ivy had insisted on making. They ate it in the living room, Ivy curled up on the couch between them, pointing out details in her latest imaginary city drawing. The mayor lives here. She has 3 cats. The fire station is painted purple because why should fire stations be red just because everyone says so? Sloane asked questions. Thad added suggestions. Ivy incorporated or rejected them with the seriousness of a city planner considering proposals. At some point, Ivy fell asleep mid-sentence, her head against Sloane's shoulder. Thad stood carefully. I should get her to bed. He lifted Ivy with the practiced ease of someone who had done this 1,000 times. She didn't wake, just shifted against his chest and kept sleeping. Give me 5 minutes. Sloane waited in the living room, looking at the photographs on the mantel. Margot and Thad on their wedding day, young and impossibly happy. Ivy as a newborn, tiny and red-faced. A family photograph from maybe 2 years ago. Margot already thin, already sick, but smiling. Thad's arm around her, Ivy on her lap. A life that had been full and then suddenly wasn't. She heard him coming down the stairs, turned before he entered the room. She was out before I got her into her pajamas. Long day of hosting. She's been planning this since Tuesday. I've heard at least 47 versions of the menu. They stood there in the lamplit quiet. Outside, the city moved through its Friday night rhythms. But in here, the world had narrowed to just this space, this moment. Thank you for coming, Thad said. It meant a lot to her. It means... He stopped. Started again. I haven't brought anyone here since Margot. You're the first person outside of family who's been in this house in 2 years. The weight of that settled between them. I'm honored, Sloane said, and meant it. He moved to the window, looked out at the street below. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter. There's something I need to tell you about Margot, about how she died. Sloane waited. She understood this was not something he'd planned to say, but something he needed to. The cancer was stage 4 when they found it. She lived 18 months past the initial prognosis. Toward the end, she was in a lot of pain, but she kept going because his voice caught. He cleared it. Because Ivy needed her to. Because she wanted every minute she could get. He turned from the window. The last week she recorded some things. Messages for Ivy's future. Birthdays, graduation, wedding day. Things she wanted to make sure Ivy knew. Sloane felt tears building behind her eyes. She made one for me too. I haven't been able to watch it. It's been 26 months and I still can't. The honesty of it, the raw admission that grief didn't follow, a timeline that 2 years wasn't long enough to metabolize a loss that size, hit her square in the chest. You will when you're ready. What if I'm never ready? Then that's okay too. There's no right way to do this. He looked at her for a long moment. Ivy talks about you constantly. At breakfast, at dinner, before bed. You're in every conversation. And I've been trying to figure out why. Why you? Why now? Sloane didn't know what to say to that. I think, he paused, choosing words carefully. I think she recognizes something in you. That you're not trying to fix anything. You're just present. You don't need her to be okay. You let her be exactly where she is. The lamplight caught the side of his face, cast shadows under his eyes. He looked tired. He looked like a man who had been holding something heavy for a very long time. I need to tell you something too, Sloane heard herself say, about my father. She told him about the morning in the kitchen, about the eggs on the stove, about the ambulance ride. She told him about the voicemail she'd kept on her phone for 3 years, until the phone died and she lost it and felt like she'd lost him all over again. She told him about the first year after, when she'd gone through the motions of college because she didn't know what else to do, and how she'd barely passed her classes because she couldn't focus on anything except the absence. Everyone kept telling me it would get easier. That time heals. But it doesn't heal, it just changes shape, he finished. Yes. They were standing closer now, though she wasn't sure when that had happened. Close enough that she could see the exact shade of his eyes in the lamplight, the small scar above his left eyebrow, the way his jaw tightened when he was holding something back. Sloane. The doorbell rang. They both startled. Thad moved to the door, opened it, to reveal a woman in her mid-60s with sharp eyes and an expression that suggested she was not accustomed to being kept waiting. Willa, Thad's voice had gone careful. I wasn't expecting you. The woman Willa stepped inside without invitation. Her gaze swept the room, landed on Sloane, sharpened. I was in the neighborhood. Thought I'd check on Ivy. Her tone suggested this was not the full truth. She's asleep. At 8:30, it's been a long day. Willa's attention returned to Sloane with the focus of someone conducting an assessment. And you are? Before Sloane could answer, Thad spoke. This is Sloane Mercer. She works at the company. Sloane, this is Willa Ashford, Margot's mother. The air in the room shifted. Sloane felt it immediately, the change in Thad's posture, the way he'd positioned himself slightly between them, protective without being obvious. "Nice to meet you," Sloane managed. Willa did not return the pleasantry. Instead, she turned to Thad. "A word in private." Thad's jaw tightened, but he nodded. He looked at Sloane. "I'll just be a moment." They disappeared into what looked like a study. Sloane stood in the living room, trying not to listen, but unable to help catching fragments. "Bringing strangers into this house." "Not a stranger," Ivy asked. "Replacing Margot, barely 2 years." The door opened. Willa emerged, her face set in hard lines. She walked past Sloane without acknowledgement and let herself out. The door closed with more force than necessary. Thad reappeared. His expression was controlled, but she could see the anger underneath it, banked but burning. "I should go," Sloane said quietly. "No, please don't. She had no right. She's grieving too." "That doesn't give her the right to—" He stopped, took a breath. "I'm sorry, you shouldn't have been subjected to that." Sloane gathered her coat. "It's late anyway. Thank you for dinner." At the door, he caught her hand. "This isn't— I don't want you to think—" He was struggling, she realized, with something he didn't have words for yet. "It's okay," she said, and meant it. Whatever was happening between them, it was fragile and new and complicated by grief and history and a 6-year-old girl who'd already lost too much. She understood the need to be careful with it. "Tuesday," he asked. "The corner table, Tuesday." She walked home through the October streets, replaying the evening, the easy dinner, Ivy's drawings, the photographs of Margot, Willa's sharp assessment, the moment before the doorbell when Thad had been about to say something, when the space between them had felt charged with possibility. Whatever this was, it was no longer simple. The rumors started the following week. Sloane first heard them from Autumn, who appeared at her desk on Wednesday morning with coffee and an expression that Sloane had learned meant incoming information of the complicated variety. "I need to tell you something, and I debated whether I should, but I decided not telling you would be worse." Sloane set down her stylus. "People are talking," Autumn said carefully, "about you and Thad Brennan. There's nothing to talk about. I know that. You know that. But perception doesn't always care about facts." The story, as Autumn related, had apparently started with someone from accounting who'd seen Sloane leaving Thad's house on Friday night. By Monday, it had evolved into a narrative about the ambitious junior creative director who'd identified a strategic opportunity, the lonely CEO, the motherless child, and positioned herself accordingly. In one version, Sloane had known from day one who Ivy was. In another, she'd researched the family before her first week. The common thread in all versions was calculation, performance, ambition dressed up as kindness. "There's an HR complaint," Autumn said quietly, anonymous, about favoritism, inappropriate relationships, creating hostile work environment. And Sloane felt something cold settle in her stomach. We're not, I know, but the optics aren't great. Junior employee, CEO, his daughter. People are good at making patterns out of coincidences." That afternoon, Sloane received an email from HR scheduling a meeting for Friday morning. The subject line, "Workplace Conduct Discussion." She stared at it for a long time before closing her laptop. At lunch, she didn't go to the cafeteria. She ate at her desk, door closed, and tried to focus on work. Every knock made her startle. Every footstep in the hallway felt like potential confrontation. Thursday came and went without Ivy appearing at the corner table. Sloane told herself this was coincidence. Thad was probably traveling. Ivy was probably with her grandmother in Vermont, but the empty chair across from her felt like confirmation of something she didn't want to name. The HR meeting on Friday was exactly as uncomfortable as anticipated. Two representatives, both carefully neutral, walking her through the complaint. No specific accusations, just concerns about appearance of favoritism, questions about the nature of her relationship with the CEO, reminders about company policy regarding workplace relationships. Sloane answered honestly. She had befriended the CEO's daughter by accident. She had been invited to dinner once. There was no romantic relationship. She had received no preferential treatment at work. They thanked her for her time and told her they'd be in touch. She left the building during lunch and didn't come back. Called in sick on Monday. Spent the weekend in her still half-unpacked apartment, trying to figure out what to do. The right thing, she knew, was to step back. Stop sitting at the corner table. Stop accepting Ivy's invitations. Create distance until the rumors died down and everyone forgot to care. Except the thought of Ivy waiting at the table, confused about why Sloane had disappeared, made her chest hurt in a way that felt physical. She was still trying to decide when her phone rang Tuesday morning. Unknown number. Sloane Mercer. Miss Mercer, this is Marcus Reed, Mr. Brennan's assistant. Are you available at 11 today? Her stomach dropped. Yes. This time when she walked into Thad's office, he didn't ask her to sit. He was standing at the window, spine rigid, and when he turned, his face was carefully blank in a way that scared her more than anger would have. I heard about the HR meeting. It was fine. They just wanted to. I know what they wanted. I've seen the complaint file. The air between them felt charged with something dangerous. I've made a decision, he said. His voice was level controlled to the voice of the CEO making an announcement. I'm transferring you to the brand strategy division. Different floor, different department, different reporting structure. It removes any appearance of impropriety. Sloane felt like she'd been slapped. You're punishing me for something I didn't do. I'm protecting you from something you shouldn't have to deal with. By exiling me to a different floor. His jaw tightened. By removing you from a situation that will only get worse the longer it continues. And Ivy, the name came out harder than she intended. What do I tell her when she asks why I stopped coming to lunch? Something flickered across his face, pain quickly suppressed. I'll handle Ivy. Will you tell her that office politics matter more than... She stopped. She was shaking. This is exactly what they want. They want us to prove them right, to act like there's something to hide. There is something to hide. The words came out quiet but definite. At least there is for me. The room went very still. I haven't been able to stop thinking about you, he continued, voice strained, since that first day when I saw you with Ivy. The way you listened to her. The way you made her laugh. And then Friday night in my house, and he stopped. This isn't appropriate. You work for me. You're 29 years old. I'm the CEO with a dead wife and a daughter who's already attached to you, and if this goes wrong, it doesn't just hurt us, it destroys her. Sloane stood very still, absorbing each word like a blow. So you're making the decision for both of us. I'm making the decision that protects everyone. No, you're making the decision that's easiest. That lets you stay safe behind your walls, in your policies, in your fear. His eyes flashed. You have no idea what you're talking about. Don't I? I know what it's like to lose someone. I know what it's like to be so scared of losing again that you stop reaching for anything. This isn't about fear. Yes, it is. You're terrified of what Ivy might lose if this doesn't work, of what people will think, of what Margot's mother will say, of whether you're allowed to want something for yourself instead of just surviving. The words hung between them, brutal and honest. You should go, he said finally. Fine. She grabbed her bag. At the door she turned. For what it's worth, I don't think you're protecting Ivy. I think you're teaching her that love is something to be afraid of, that it's safer to be alone than to risk getting hurt. She left before he could respond. That night she drafted her resignation, stared at it for 2 hours, deleted it, wrote it again. Her phone buzzed. Text from a number she didn't recognize. This is Ivy. Dad's phone. Why didn't you come to lunch? Did I do something wrong? Sloane closed her eyes. Of course Thad hadn't handled it. Of course Ivy thought it was her fault. She called the number. Thad answered on the second ring. She's in bed. You shouldn't. Put her on. A pause, then Ivy's small voice. Sloane. Hey, sweetheart. Are you mad at me? No, not even a little bit. Then why didn't you come? Sloane looked at her resignation letter on the screen, at the half-packed boxes still lining her apartment walls, at the photograph of her father she kept on her desk. I'm figuring some things out, but it has nothing to do with you. You didn't do anything wrong. Promise. I promise. Tables don't lie, remember. A small sound that might have been a laugh. Okay. Can I talk to your dad again? Thad came back on the line. Thank you, he said it quietly. Don't thank me, just... She stopped. There's something you need to know about Margot. What? Ivy asked me the other day if I thought people who die know when we think about them. I told her I thought they did. That love doesn't stop just because someone isn't here anymore. He was quiet on the other end. I think Margot would want you to be happy, Sloane continued. I think she'd want Ivy to see you actually living instead of just going through motions. And I think she'd be disappointed that you're letting fear make your decisions. You didn't know her. No, but I know what it's like, Brian, that like to watch someone die, and I know what I'd want if it were me. I'd want the people I love to keep loving, to keep reaching, to keep believing that the world still has good things in it worth the risk. She hung up before he could respond. The next morning, she didn't resign. Instead, she went to the office, took the elevator to the 14th floor, and sat at the corner table with her lunch and a book. Ivy didn't come. She went back on Thursday. The table stayed empty. Friday morning, she received an email from HR. The investigation was closed. No policy violations found. She was cleared to return to her regular duties. She should have felt relieved. Instead, she felt hollow. That afternoon, Autumn stopped by her desk. You okay? Define okay. There's a company event next week. Annual gathering. Whole staff, assigned seating. Autumn handed her a printed card. Thought you should know. Sloane looked at the card. Her name. Table 12. Who else is at table 12? Autumn's expression was careful. That's the head table. Board members, department heads, and the CEO. Sloane set down the card. I can't go to that. You kind of have to. It's mandatory for department leadership. You made junior director last week. Didn't you see the announcement? She hadn't. She'd been too busy avoiding email. Autumn, I can't sit at a table with. I know, but not going would be worse. It would look like confirmation that there's something to hide. The gathering was held at a hotel 12 blocks from the office. Sloane wore a dress she'd bought in Portland and never had occasion to wear dark blue professional armor disguised as clothing. She found table 12 near the front of the ballroom, took her assigned seat, and tried to look like she belonged there. Thad arrived late, moving through the room with the controlled grace of someone who'd done this 100 times. He nodded to various tables, shook hands, smiled the smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. When he reached table 12, his gaze found hers for exactly 1 second before moving on. The dinner was excruciating. Conversation flowed around her board politics, market trends, merger speculation while she pushed food around her plate and tried to be invisible. Halfway through the main course, she felt a small hand on her arm. She turned. Ivy was standing beside her chair in a navy dress with small white buttons, her hair down, making her look older and younger simultaneously. What are you doing here? Sloane whispered. Dad said I could come for the first part, and I wanted to give you this. She held out a folded piece of paper. Sloane opened it, a drawing careful and deliberate rendered in colored pencils. 2 figures at a table, one large, one small. Between them, a juice box. In the corner, a white rabbit backpack leaning against the table leg. Above it, in careful, uneven letters, my friend Sloane. Sloane looked at the drawing for a long time. She became aware that she needed to take a breath. It's beautiful. I'm going to frame it like Dad does, Ivy said, pleased. Exactly like that. The room had gone quiet. Sloane looked up. Everyone was watching. Ivy, apparently unconcerned with the attention, took Sloane's hand, all 5 fingers deliberate, and began walking toward the front of the room where Thad was standing at the microphone. Sloane followed because what else do you do when a 6-year-old decides something? Ivy walked to the microphone with focused confidence. She looked out at the assembled faces without apparent concern. This is my friend Sloane, she announced with clear diction. She listens like you're interesting. I think everyone should have a friend who listens like that. She looked up at her father. There was a communication between them, small, wordless, the kind that accumulates between a parent and child over years of paying attention to each other. Thad stepped to the microphone. He looked at Sloane for a long moment. The room waited. When he spoke, his voice was quiet, not loud enough for performance, exactly loud enough to be heard. My daughter has better instincts than I do, he paused. She also has better timing. A small movement of breath through the room. Not quite laughter, but its gentler cousin. He looked at Sloane. I've spent 2 years being careful, making decisions based on what was safe, what was appropriate, what wouldn't hurt anyone. And in trying to protect everyone, I forgot that Ivy doesn't need protection from happiness. She needs to see that it's possible. His hands were gripping the podium edge. Sloane Mercer walked into our lives by complete accident. A corner table, a Tuesday afternoon, a question asked in a quiet voice, and everything changed. The ballroom was absolutely silent now. I don't know what happens next, he continued. I don't know if this works or if we're making a mistake or if loving someone new while still loving someone gone is even possible. But Ivy knows. She knew from the first day, and I'm done pretending to be smarter than a 6-year-old. He looked at Ivy, then back to Sloane. I'd like very much for you to be part of our family, if that's something you'd want. It was not a proposal in the formal sense. There was no ring, no bent knee. It was something quieter and more honest than that. A man who had spent 2 years being careful, saying plainly and in front of people that he was done being careful about this particular thing. Sloane stood in the front of a ballroom in a city she had driven 14 hours to reach, holding a colored pencil drawing of herself sitting at a corner table, and she looked at the man and the girl and felt something settle in her chest that was the opposite of that stone from before. Yes, she said, simply without hedging. Ivy pumped her small fist in a gesture of unmistakable victory. The room erupted in applause that Sloane barely heard. She was looking at Thad, at the way his shoulders had dropped, the tension finally leaving them, at the smile that was real this time, that reached his eyes and changed his whole face. He stepped down from the podium, met her halfway. I'm sorry, he said quietly, just for her, for the transfer threat, for making decisions out of fear, for forgetting that sometimes the brave thing is letting someone in. I'm sorry, too, for pushing when you weren't ready. I was ready. I was just too scared to admit it. Ivy appeared between them, grabbing both their hands. Can we get cake now? They laughed. The ballroom was still applauding. The rumors would continue for a while, Sloane knew. There would be conversations, questions, probably more HR meetings. But right now, standing between Thad and Ivy while a room full of strangers celebrated something they didn't fully understand, Sloane felt certain of exactly one thing: she had driven 14 hours to get here, and she would do it again. The engagement was not announced at the company gathering. Thad was, to no one's surprise, resistant to making personal things into institutional events. What happened in the ballroom stayed there, managed by Marcus, into the internal company narrative as a heartful moment, and left at that. The rumors did not expire so much as they transformed. The people who had been sharpest became in the way of people who have been proven wrong about something they can't quite admit, simply quieter on the subject. Autumn sent Sloane a text the morning after. For the record, I always knew. It was not entirely true, but Sloane appreciated the spirit of it. What changed was proximity. Thad and Sloane were careful in the office, no different than before, professional, to the point of almost formal. But outside those walls, they began building what felt less like dating and more like learning to be a family before they officially became one. Dinners at the Brownstone became a weekly ritual. Sloane would arrive on Friday evenings and stay through the weekend, sometimes sleeping in the guest room, waking to the sound of Ivy's feet on the stairs and the smell of coffee. They fell into rhythms. Thad cooked, Sloane cleaned. Ivy narrated her week with detailed enthusiasm. They played board games that Ivy won with suspicious frequency. They watched movies curled on the couch, Ivy between them, her head on Sloane's shoulder, her feet in Thad's lap. Small intimacies that felt larger than they were. It was during one of these weekends in late November that Sloane met the rest of Thad's family. His mother arrived unannounced on Saturday morning, a tall woman in her early 60s with silver hair and Thad's exact shade of eyes. You must be Sloane. She didn't wait for confirmation, just pulled Sloane into a hug that smelled like lavender and something citrus. I'm Eleanor. I've been hearing about you for weeks. Ivy appeared in his doorway. Grandma, Eleanor scooped her up with practiced ease. There's my artist. Have you been drawing? So many drawings. Want to see? They disappeared upstairs, leaving Sloane alone with Thad in the kitchen. I should have warned you she was coming. It's fine. She seems lovely. She is. She's also relentless when she wants information. He was not wrong. Eleanor returned 20 minutes later, having apparently extracted Ivy's entire life story since Tuesday, and settled herself at the kitchen table with coffee and the clear intention of conducting an interview. So, Portland, what made you leave? Sloane had gotten used to this question. She gave the practiced answer about career growth and new opportunities. Eleanor nodded, unconvinced. And your family? Are they still in Portland? My mother is. My father died when I was 19. Eleanor's expression softened immediately. I'm sorry, that's much too young to lose a parent. It was sudden. Heart attack. I was there when it happened. Thad's hand found hers under the table, a small pressure grounding. Then you understand what Thad and Ivy have been through, the shape of it. I do. Eleanor studied her for a long moment. Whatever she was looking for, she seemed to find it because she smiled, and the interrogation shifted into something gentler, questions about Sloane's work, her apartment, whether she'd found a good coffee shop in the neighborhood yet. Later, after Eleanor had left and Ivy was in bed, Thad found Sloane on the back porch despite the cold. "My mother likes you." "How can you tell?" "She stayed for 4 hours. When she doesn't like someone, she finds an excuse to leave within 30 minutes. Sloane wrapped her arms around herself. Thad disappeared inside, returned with a blanket, draped it over her shoulders. "There's something I need to do. I've been putting it off, but I can't anymore." He pulled a flash drive from his pocket. Small, silver, innocuous. "Margot's video, the one she made for me. I need to watch it, and I—" His voice caught. He cleared it. "I can't do it alone." They went inside. Thad's study was a small room off the main hallway lined with bookshelves and dominated by a desk passed down from his grandfather. He closed the door, inserted the drive into his laptop, and sat on the leather couch that faced away from the desk. Sloane sat beside him. The video loaded. Margot appeared on screen, thinner than in the photographs. Sloane had seen her hair gone from treatment, but her eyes bright and fierce. "If you're watching this, then I'm gone, and you're still here, and I need you to listen to me." Thad's hand found Sloane's. She held on. "First, Ivy, make sure she knows I loved her. Make sure she knows it wasn't her fault or anyone's fault. Cancer just is. Sometimes bodies betray us, and there's nothing to be done except love each other through it." Margot paused, looked directly at the camera with an intensity that felt almost physical. "Second, you. Thaddeus Brennan, you are the most stubborn man I've ever met. You're going to try to turn this grief into armor. You're going to pour everything into work and into Ivy and forget that you're allowed to want things for yourself." Tears were streaming down Thad's face now. Sloane could feel her own following. "Don't do that. Don't make my death the reason you stop living. I fell in love with you because you were brave enough to want everything, love and work and a family and a life that felt full. Don't lose that because I'm not there." She leaned closer to the camera. "Third, and this is the hardest one, when you meet someone new, and you will, that I know you don't compare her to me. Don't make her prove she deserves the space I left. Just love her. Differently. Fully. The way you loved me." Margot's voice gentled. "I'm not asking you to forget me. I'm asking you to remember me by living a full life, a happy one, a brave one." She smiled, and Sloane could see in that smile exactly what Thad had loved, what he had lost. "Take care of our girl. Take care of yourself. And when you're ready, really ready, not just going through motions, let someone in. You deserve that. Ivy deserves to see you happy." The video ended. They sat in silence for a long time. Thad's shoulders shook with the force of crying he'd been holding back for 26 months. Sloane held him and let her own tears fall and understood that this was what grief looked like when you finally stopped running from it. Eventually, he pulled back, wiped his face. "She knew. She knew exactly what I'd do, how I'd try to manage it all by building walls and staying safe. She loved you. She wanted you to be happy. She would have liked you." He looked at Sloane, really looked the way he had that first day in his office. "She would have appreciated that you didn't try to be anything except exactly who you are. I can't replace her. I don't want you to. I want what she said, to love you differently, fully, not as a replacement, but as new, honoring what I had by choosing to keep living." He kissed her, then salt wet and honest, and it felt like a door opening that had been locked for too long. December arrived with early snow and holiday preparation chaos. Ivy threw herself into it with enthusiasm. She insisted on making decorations for the house, stringing lights that blinked in patterns she designed, creating ornaments from clay that hardened into lumpy approximations of animals and buildings. Sloane helped, spending weekends covered in glitter and paint, listening to Ivy's detailed plans for where each decoration should go and why. Thad watched them from the doorway one Saturday afternoon, coffee in hand, expressions soft. "What?" Sloane asked, catching him. "Nothing, just this, you two, the way she is with you." Ivy was currently explaining why the clay giraffe needed to go on the mantle next to Margot's photograph, so they can be friends. That night, after Ivy was asleep, Thad made his decision. "I want to ask you something properly, not in a ballroom in front of 500 people." He didn't have a ring yet. He had Margot's still in its box in his dresser, but that felt wrong in a way he couldn't articulate. Instead, he had a piece of paper with a sketch on it, a design he'd drawn himself, simple and modern. Nothing like Margot's vintage band. I talked to Ivy, asked her how she'd feel if I asked you to marry me. She said finally, and then gave me this. He showed Sloane the sketch. A ring with a small sapphire Ivy's choice set in a band that curved like a wave. She helped design it, said the blue matches how she feels when you're around, safe and happy, and like good things are possible. Sloane looked at the sketch at Thad's careful handwriting, noting dimensions and details at the small addition in crayon at the bottom that was clearly Ivy's contribution, a tiny rabbit. I know it's fast. We've only been doing this for 3 months. And I know there's still so much we're figuring out, but Ivy already knows. And I know. And Margot knew before any of us. He took Sloane's hands. Will you marry me? Will you be Ivy's, not her mother, because she has a mother who loved her, but her second chance at having someone who shows up and listens and makes her feel like she's the most interesting person in the room. Yes, Sloane said, and watched relief and joy flood his face. Yes to all of it. They told Ivy the next morning. She absorbed the news with the seriousness of someone receiving important information, then disappeared to her room and returned with a drawing she'd apparently been working on for weeks. 3 stick figures holding hands, a house with enormous windows, a garden with both dinosaurs and rabbits. At the top, in careful letters, my family. We choose each other. The wedding planning should have been stressful. Instead, it became a project that pulled them closer. They decided on small 40 people late May, a garden venue an hour outside Boston that Sloane found and Ivy approved of after a thorough inspection to ensure adequate space for her flower girl duties. But as spring approached, Thad began to struggle with his vows. Sloane noticed it in the way he'd start sentences about the wedding and then stop. The way he'd look at Margot's photograph on the mantel with an expression she couldn't read. One night in early April, she found him in his study staring at a blank document on his computer. What are you working on? My vows, or trying to. I've written 17 versions and deleted all of them. She read over his shoulder. The latest attempt was beautiful, honest, specific, full of things she knew he felt. It was also comparing her to Margot in every other line. Where Margot was bold, you are thoughtful. Where she led, you listen. Where she filled rooms, you create space. Thad, he looked up. These are beautiful. They're also not about me. They're about how I'm different from Margot. He stared at the screen. I don't know how to write about you without measuring me against her. It's not fair to you. No, it's not fair to either of us, or to Margot, honestly. She didn't want you to spend the rest of your life comparing. He closed the laptop, rubbed his face. I don't know how to do this, how to marry you while still loving her. How to make you feel like you're enough when part of me is always going to be missing her. Sloane knelt beside his chair. But I'm not asking you to choose. I'm asking you to make room for both. To love me the way Margot said, differently, fully, not as a replacement. They sat in the quiet of the study. Outside, spring rain had started gentle against the windows. Start over. Write your vows like Margot's not in the room, like it's just you and me and what we're building together. Beep. 3 days later, Willa Ashford arrived. Sloane had not seen her since the night at Thad's house months ago. She appeared on a Tuesday afternoon, walking into the Brennan Media Group lobby and asking to speak with Sloane Mercer. Autumn, who happened to be in the lobby, texted Sloane immediately, Margot's mom is here. Asking for you. Want me to run interference? Sloane took the elevator down, found Willa standing by the window, spine straight, expression unreadable. Mrs. Ashford. Miss Mercer, I was hoping we could talk. They went to a coffee shop 2 blocks away, sat across from each other in a booth near the back. Willa ordered tea with the precision of someone who had specific preferences about temperature and steep time. I owe you an apology for how I behaved when we first met. It was unfair and unkind. Sloane hadn't expected this. You were protecting Ivy. I was protecting my memory of my daughter. There's a difference. Willa wrapped her hands around her cup. Margot was my only child. When she died, I lost not just her, but the future I'd imagined. Grandchildren growing up with her, holidays watching her grow old. All of it gone. Her voice was steady, but her eyes were wet. And then Thad mentioned you, and I saw it as a threat. Someone trying to take her place, to erase her from Ivy's memory. I would never. I know that now. I've been watching you with Ivy these last months. At the Christmas gathering, at Eleanor's birthday party. The way you let her talk about Margot, the way you don't flinch when she mentions her mother. Willa set down her cup. You're not trying to replace her. You're making room for her. That's what Margot would have wanted. She reached into her purse, pulled out a small jewelry box. This was Margot's wedding ring. Dad returned it to me after she died. He said he couldn't keep it, that it hurt too much to look at. She opened the box. A simple gold band, worn smooth in places from years of wearing. I've been holding on to it, thinking maybe someday Ivy would want it. But I realized Margot wouldn't want this locked in a drawer. She'd want it to become new. She pushed the box across the table. Take it, melt it down, work it into your ring, or Thad's, or both. Transform it. That's what Margot believed in: transformation, not preservation, making new from what was lost. Sloane looked at the ring, at this offering that was more than jewelry. Are you sure? I'm sure. Margot loved Thad with everything she had. She'd want him to love you the same way. And she'd want you to know that you have my blessing. Both of you do. The conversation that had started with edges softened into depth. They talked for 2 hours about Margot, about grief, about learning to let go while still holding on. When they finally left the coffee shop, Willa hugged Sloane with the same fierceness Eleanor had shown months ago. Take care of them, and let them take care of you. Sloane brought the ring to Thad that night, told him about the conversation about Willa's blessing, about the transformation metaphor. He held the ring for a long time, turning it in the light. Margot used to say that gold never really dies, it just becomes new. Gets melted down and remade into different jewelry, different purposes. Like love, Sloane said, like love. They took both rings to a jeweler the following week. Margot's band and the sapphire design Ivy had helped create. Asked him to combine them into 2 new bands, made from the same gold one for each of them. The jeweler, an older man who'd been in business 40 years, understood immediately what they were asking for. Transformation, not replacement. Exactly. May arrived with weather designed for outdoor weddings. The venue was a restored farm with gardens carefully tended for generations. Ivy inspected every corner 3 times before declaring it acceptable for a wedding. The ceremony itself was small and simple. 40 people seated in white chairs under an arbor covered in climbing roses. A string quartet playing Bach, Margot's favorite piece, with cello that made Thad's eyes wet the moment it started. Ivy was the flower girl, wearing a dress she'd chosen herself, navy blue with small white flowers. She took her role with utmost seriousness, placing each petal with considered care, looking up periodically to ensure they were landing correctly. She's going to do this for 20 minutes, Thad whispered to his mother in the front row. Eleanor smiled. Let her take her time. This is hers too. When Ivy finally finished and walked back up the aisle, she came to stand between Thad and Sloane at the front with absolute certainty about where she belonged. She held Sloane's hand on one side, Thad's on the other. She did not let go through the entire ceremony. The officiant, a friend of Eleanor's who had known Margot, acknowledged her presence without dwelling on it. We gathered today to celebrate not an ending and a beginning, but a continuation. The love that Margot and Thad built continues in Ivy. The family they created continues, transformed and expanded to include Sloane. This is not replacement. This is growth. Thad's vows, when he finally spoke them, were nothing like the 17 deleted versions. They were simple and direct and entirely about Sloane. I spent 2 years afraid to want anything, afraid that wanting would lead to losing, and I couldn't survive another loss. You taught me that bravery isn't protecting yourself from pain. It's choosing to love anyway, knowing nothing is guaranteed except the present moment. His voice was steady, but his hands shook slightly. You saw Ivy when she was invisible. You saw me when I was hiding behind work and responsibility. You sat down at a corner table and said yes to a 6-year-old's question, and that yes changed everything. He looked at Ivy, then back at Sloane. I promised to show up. Every day. Every hard conversation, every moment of joy, and every moment of grief. I promise to love you not as a replacement for what I lost, but as exactly who you are, someone I choose every single day, knowing that choosing you is the best decision I've ever made. Sloane's vows were shorter, but no less true. I came to this city looking for a better version of myself. What I found was a family I didn't know I needed. A child who taught me that bravery sometimes looks like asking to sit down. A man who showed me that it's possible to honor the past while building a future. She squeezed Ivy's hand. Ivy, I'm not here to be your mother. Your mother loved you with everything she had, and that love doesn't end. But I'm here to be your second chance at having someone who shows up, who listens like you're interesting, who believes that imaginary cities deserve real attention and that broccoli does in fact taste like the outside. Ivy giggled quickly, suppressed. That I promise to make room for your grief and your joy, for Margot's memory and our future, for the parts of you that are healed and the parts that are still healing. You don't have to carry everything alone anymore. The officiant pronounced them married. Thad kissed Sloane while Ivy cheered. The small gathering erupted in applause. At the reception, Willa Ashford stood and offered a toast that silenced the room. My daughter Margot believed in transformation. She believed that the best way to honor what you've lost is not to preserve it in amber, but to let it become new. She raised her glass. Watching Thad and Sloane today, seeing Ivy stand between them with such certainty, I understand what Margot meant. Love doesn't end when someone dies. It transforms, it expands, it makes room. She looked directly at Sloane. Welcome to the family. Margot would have liked you. More importantly, she would have been grateful that Ivy has you. The evening settled into music and dancing and warmth. Ivy danced with Thad, her feet on his shoes. She danced with Sloane, spinning until she was dizzy. She danced with her grandmother Eleanor and with Willa and with anyone who would take her hand. At some point, she found Sloane sitting at the edge of the dance floor taking a break. Can I tell you a secret? Always. Ivy leaned in close. I knew you were going to marry Dad from the very first day. How tender, because you looked at me like I was a whole person, not just a kid. And I knew anyone who saw me like that would see Dad like that too. She hugged Sloane quickly, fiercely. I'm glad I asked to sit with you. Me too, sweetheart. Best decision you ever made. Best decision we both made. She ran off to find more dancing partners, leaving Sloane with tears in her eyes and a fullness in her chest that she was beginning to recognize as home. Later, much later, when the reception had wound down and Ivy had fallen asleep in the car on the way back to the house, Thad carried her upstairs while Sloane followed. They stood together in Ivy's doorway watching her sleep. I keep waiting for the other shoe to drop, for something to go wrong. Things will go wrong. Lots of things will. That's not a question. How do you know we'll survive it? Sloane thought about her father, about the morning in the kitchen, about every hard thing she'd survived since. Because we're choosing to. Every day. That's what love is, not a feeling, but a choice you keep making, even when it's hard. They went downstairs. Sloane made tea while Thad changed out of his suit. They sat on the back porch despite the chill, wrapped in blankets, listening to the night sounds of the neighborhood. In Ivy's room, a light came on briefly. She appeared at the window, looked down, waved, disappeared again. She checks on us, makes sure we're still mine. Smart kid. She learned it from you. The checking. The making sure people are okay. She knew it before me. She's been taking care of you for 2 years. We've been taking care of each other. He took Sloane's hand. The ring made from Margot's gold set with Ivy's sapphire caught the porch light. Thank you for sitting down, for saying yes, for staying even when it got complicated. Thank you for letting me, for trusting me with Ivy, for choosing to love again even when it terrified you. They sat until the cold drove them inside. Climbed the stairs together, checked on Ivy one more time, still sleeping, clutching the stuffed rabbit from her backpack, and went to their room. Sloane looked at the photographs on Thad's dresser. Margot still there, smiling from their wedding day. Ivy as a baby. The new ones they'd added, Sloane and Ivy at the cafeteria table, the three of them, at Christmas, the wedding photo from today. Past and present, memory and moment, all of it held together. In the hallway outside their room hung 3 framed drawings. The first, Ivy's original from the ballroom. My friend Sloane. 2 figures at a table, a juice box between them, a white rabbit backpack in the corner. The second, their wedding photograph, all 3 of them. The third, Ivy's newest creation, made the week before the wedding. 3 stick figures holding hands in front of a house with enormous windows. A garden with dinosaurs and rabbits living together. At the top, in careful letters, my family. We chose each other. Thad paused in front of the drawings, coffee cup in hand, the way he did most mornings now. She wants to fill the whole hallway eventually. She's already planning the next one. What's it going to be? Something about transformation. She showed me the sketch. It has a caterpillar and a butterfly and three people holding hands underneath. Sloane smiled. She understands more than we give her credit for. She always has. They stood together looking at the drawings, a beginning, a middle, a continuation. A story told in crayon, in colored pencil, about a corner table, and a rabbit backpack, and a question asked in a quiet voice. Can I sit with you? The answer had changed everything, had transformed grief into growth, loneliness into love, three separate people into something that looked remarkably like a family. Tables don't lie, neither do children who know what they need before anyone tells them what they're supposed to want. Some things are worth waiting for. Some things begin with the smallest gestures, a child asking to sit down, a woman saying yes, two people choosing to believe that love can expand rather than replace that making room. Doesn't mean forgetting what came before. That sometimes the bravest thing you can do is let yourself be chosen by a 6-year-old with a rabbit backpack and an instinct for knowing exactly who belongs at her table. The corner table in the cafeteria stayed significant. They still sat there, sometimes Sloane and Ivy on Thursdays when schedules allowed all three of them, when Thad could steal away from meetings. It became their landmark, the place where their story had started, the spot they returned to when they needed to remember how simple the beginning had been. A question, an answer, a juice box between them. Everything else had grown from that. And on the best days when Ivy sat between them, drawing her imaginary cities and explaining with absolute conviction why the library needed to be near the park and the bakery close to the school, Sloane would catch Thad's eye across the table and see in his expression everything they'd built together. Not perfect, not without ghosts, but theirs, chosen, real. A family made from transformation rather than replacement, from room made rather than space filled, from love that expands instead of divides. From a Tuesday afternoon, a rainy window, and a small voice asking the question that mattered most, "Can I sit with you?" Just Sloane had said that day, not knowing what yes would mean. Yes to Ivy, yes to Thad, yes to grief and joy held in the same hands, yes to a future built on honoring the past, yes to becoming family by choice rather than blood, yes to all of it. And in the end, that yes, simple, unguarded, offered freely to a child with a rabbit backpack turned out to be the most important word she'd ever spoken.